This is just gonna, I'm not trying to be silly today, but I'm gonna be a little bit silly. Does anyone ever play the game when you're a kid, or youth group? We did this a lot. It would be, you're taking a long drive and you're trying to kill time. That was before everyone had cell phones and could just text and stuff the whole way there. Text the person next to them, which is the funny thing when you're dealing with teenagers, they often text the person next to them instead of speaking. Anyone ever experienced that? Okay. You're in the same room. You're in the same car. Just go talk. But we always had this, would you rather? So yeah, okay, several people like it. Some of you are awkwardly confused. You should see the looks I get. It was weird preaching with no one here. Now everyone has a mask, so I can't see the mouths. So I'm are those angry eyes? Are those fish eyes? Is that the stank eye? What eye's going on? Anyway, but would you rather, if those of you don't know, it's a sort of, would you rather lose the ability to read or the ability to speak? It's a thinker. Would you rather live in a cave or live in a treehouse?
A treehouse.
Man, that was I don't know, caves are nice though. You don't have to have air conditioning. They're cool. You might get a bear as a roommate. Kind of cool things. Would you rather live without the internet or live without air conditioning and heating?
Internet.
Okay. I don't know, the internet's hard, right? We get so used to it. Would you rather be unable to use search engines, you can't Google, or unable to use social media?
Social media.
The kids are a little less sure. They're I kind of like the social media. Anyway, today we're really, Solomon, it's kind of funny how things fall. And this section is sort of like fatherly advice. And he's really kind of asking a would you rather question. Would you rather have a good reputation or a good time?
Good reputation.
Well, I hope so. That's where we're going today. And would you rather go to a party or a funeral?
Party.
Man, well, you're going to get confused today. It does, today it really does sound a lot like stuff I tell my kids. So, every time, my kids are sitting over in this section today, every time I say something that, that I've said to you before, you can kind of raise your hand. No, you probably keep your hand up the whole time. It was funny, last week they forgot their masks. We had to put them in another room because they weren't allowed in the building. Shout out. They're oh, now it's awkward because Dad's talking about me. Hey, I got good kids, so great kids. So those of you who are following along, we're studying the book of Ecclesiastes, and we believe Solomon wrote it. He doesn't actually say, hey, this is Shlomo and I wrote this, but we believe from the context it is. He was this teacher. We believe it was probably written kind of at the latter part of his life, because when you're starting out, sometimes you don't understand how life fully works, right? And so this is stuff he's learned along the way. So starting in verse 1, a good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. Welcome to deep water. There's some deep meaning to some of these, but they can be difficult, right? There's some sayings and some things they say that are a little difficult. And, many of us, they tend to be Proverbs like this, because even though this is the book of Proverbs, these are proverbs. And they're written in a way that kind of shocks you when you read them. And they kind of make you puzzle and think for a minute, what does he mean by that? Kind of like my dad jokes. So you kind of go, what does he mean by that? But, and really, he's talking about here, your reputation versus your outward image. Many of us are driven to improve the external, right? We work out. We spray stuff on our faces. I don't know. We comb our hair. I forget to comb my hair. I've had to, during the quarantine, start using a comb again because I'm a dude and I could get out of the shower and just do that. And sometimes I even forget to do that. It still it doesn't get any better no matter what I do. So why spend the time working on it? But, we're driven to, we do exercise, we wear certain clothes. And those of us, especially, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you couldn't shower before you had to go someplace. So you throw a little extra deodorant on, kind of cover that stank. And that's really what he's talking about. You can kind of do the external stuff, but really it's the internal things that matter. And it's better to spend time working on who you are than just presenting yourself as something you're not. Now, when I say, now this will be interesting because I think generationally people have different ideas about vehicles. When I say Toyota, what do you think? I can't hear you because you're wearing masks. But you probably think dependable vehicle, okay. When I think Honda, I mean, you probably think deer in trunk, because for so long I talked about my Civic with the deer in the trunk. If I say Mustang Camaro,
Yes.
I mean, you think muscle car and power, right? How about Lamborghini? And you'd probably think sporty, fast, even if you've never driven one and you'll never own one. They have reputations as certain things. So you may have never driven a Toyota. I've never owned a Toyota, but I remember I had a pastor I worked with in California. He had hundreds of thousands of miles on his car, and I don't think he'd ever changed the oil. He just dumped more in. I'm like, this is a great car. No oil changes. He changed the filter once in a while and just kept pouring in oil. Not good for the car generally, so I'm not advising that in any way, especially those of you who are starting out the drive. But there's you may never hear what they have a reputation. And a lot of things have a reputation. And here, we all have reputations, right? Good or bad. Now, you're home, someone calls you. Now, one, you're like, why have people call today instead of text? We've gotten so used to text, we're like, why is someone calling me? They could text me. And I've called people and they text me right back, like, what's up? But I'm like, well, apparently you are, but you're not answering your phone. And sometimes I call you at 4 a.m. because I drop my phone, sorry. Some of you are like, that's why I don't call Jeff, because he might hit redial at 4 o'clock in the morning, because I'm up late. Or up early, depending on how you look at that. I guess I'm up early. Anyway, caller ID hits though, and you're like, you ever get someone, you're like, I don't want to answer that.
Yeah.
I know, it's probably me when I call you, right? No, but on the other hand, sometimes you get caller ID and you're excited, right? You're like, oh, I can't wait to talk. And a lot of times it has to do with their reputation and who they are. Is this someone who's going to drag me down? Who's going to drone on forever, talking about themselves? I literally have somebody who calls me sometimes and they never let me speak. They talk the whole time and then they're like, hey, well, it's good, I got to go. And I'm like, we were on the phone for 45 minutes. I didn't get to say anything, and then you hung up on me without. It's interesting answering the phone with them. Don't get me wrong, but it's not. Their reputation with me is this is not going to be a mutually encouraging experience. And it says, and the day you die is better than the day you were born. Now, we have 2 Facebook posts. If I posted today, my blank died. So think of somebody. People are generally like. That's not a good post, right? You don't post my dog died and people are like, that's weird. If you're, but if you post my baby was born, what are people like? Congratulations, love. People are, and that's exciting. And Solomon's saying, hey, death is better than birth. Isn't that a weird would you rather? And really what he's getting to is, there's something about death if you have the right, if you've lived life the right way. Now, recently there was a guy named Ravi Zacharias. Anyone know who he was? Great guy. I love listening to him. I've listened to so much of his stuff. I couldn't recreate it myself. There's certain things. He had a mind that was just unusually exquisite. And he had this way of, arguing the faith, but not in a way that was condemning to people. It was encouraging. And so for me, I loved it. And so when he passed away recently, he had a life well lived, right? He used the intellect and the abilities God gave him. And there are very few detractors or people who would say, hey, he did certain, and he was what was called a Christian apologist. And that doesn't mean he's saying sorry, but it comes from apologia to explain things. And he did a great job explaining things, and he used his gifts well. And really, that's a model for, not that he was perfect. I'm sure his wife could tell you when she wasn't perfect. I'm sure his kids would tell you, Daisy wasn't the best dad. Happy Father's Day. But generally, he used his gifts well. And if you remember in Matthew We told this story not long ago. Jesus says, he talks about a master goes away and he gives his servants, all these, bunch of silver. He gave the one 5 bags or talents, which is a big sum of money. And so the master, he goes away. The servant's like, hey, look, I did a good job with what I got. And hey, I got you 5 more. And so it was this good use of talents. And again, you can go back and listen to that message, or we can kind of flesh it out at a later time. But really, it said, the master was full of praise. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And really the bottom line of that was we've been all given gifts and abilities and talents, and how we use it in life matters. And so when you're born, it's a clean slate. We don't know much about you, right? You're given a name, but the name doesn't, we give thought to names and we try to think about why we want to name our kids. But when my kids were born, it wasn't like, oh, that name, I know they've done great things. But how we handle and live our life matters. How we handle and live our life is something that ultimately, when we meet Jesus face to face, we want to hear, well done. Verse 2 says this, better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. What? I know. People are like, what was that? Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter. It's better to cry than go to a comedy club. You're like, not on a Saturday night. Come on. For sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool only thinks about having a good time. Now, remember when you were a kid, and those of us who are a little bit older, and you get sick and you have to stay home, and you'd watch what? Price is Right. That was, those are so certain. It was like one of the few things on. You guys are younger. You've had a time where you got on your phone, like watch whatever you wanted when you're sick, or on your TV, or you had, we just had like the basic antenna TV channels, and it was like Price is Right. So you had to watch the Price is Right. And it was funny because as kids, you don't know what anything costs, so you'd be terrible at any of those games. But I remember, they always had the Showcase Showdown.
Yeah.
Remember that? And it would be like, Showcase 1. And I remember getting older too and watching this, and I'm like, because again, most of the stuff as a kid, you're just, what do you want to hear? You want a brand new car? They'd be like, yes, that was a good showcase. And often they'd have to like choose, you can keep what's in this showcase or go to the next. And they'd have some college kid, and they're like, appliances. And he's like, yeah, I'll pass on that showcase because I want to go for the next, I want the jet ski. And really, in life, kind of Showcase 1, Showcase 2. Showcase 1, funeral, sadness, death. You're like, give me the other showcase, right? Like I'll take parties and comedy clubs and jet skis. And life is like that. But the author here, Solomon is kind of saying the opposite. Are funerals better than parties? Would you rather go to a funeral or party? Sometimes parties are, especially for a life well lived. It's funny because I had a friend one time. He was a pastor, actually now he works in administrative capacity. But I remember he's like, yeah, I love funerals more than weddings. And I'm like, you are a weird dude. Again, he's still my friend. His name was Jeff, so who knows? Wasn't me. Anyway, funerals, it doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't seem right because, funerals are, they do generally have food, afterwards. And you don't have to bring a gift to a funeral. Like, you do have to send flowers. There's the cultural thing. But really, what he's pointing to is, funerals are hard. Especially when someone dies young. I've had to, Denise and I were talking about some tough funerals I've had to do through life. I did one time for a lady. I was planning her wedding with her fiance. Instead, I did her funeral. That was hard. That's hard. And if you lived a good life, there is this level of joy at the funeral. But really, here's a quick piece of advice. For some of you, I'm going to do your funerals. And you're suddenly going, maybe I should have chosen this church. We're passing out Kool-Aid next. No, but the truth is, part of the pastoral thing is sometimes I have to do funerals. And, some of you need to live your life so I don't have to lie at it. I'm just saying. Let that sink in for a second. But, please don't make me lie at your funeral. You'll be lying anyway. Anyway, funerals... Dad joke. Funerals, though, make us ask the big questions in life, right? Everyone's like, weddings, people are running in late because it's a big party and they're all having a good time. Funerals, people generally get there on time. It's almost weird. Because we're thinking, this is it. This is kind of the final thing. But funerals, we really start asking the big questions of life. No one's like, chilling out, eating a giant shrimp, having a drink going, hey, so what about death? That's a party. At a funeral, though, you might be eating a giant shrimp and, drinking a Coke and go, man, what is life all about? And so what Solomon's getting at there is it's important to really look at what's important in life. What's the reason for living? Why am I doing all this thing? Because life is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of action. It's a lot of moving around. It's a lot of things and choices you make every day. But what's the purpose? Where are things moving? What are we going for? A commentator I read, who I really like his commentary on Ecclesiastes, he said this: recognizing the brevity and preciousness of life, we should live life seriously. It doesn't mean we're not having fun. Jeff likes the party. But, yesterday, boots and pants and boots and pants and boots and... I did a wedding yesterday, which was fun. It was weird, though. I was on the way to the wedding, and I'm like, I forgot my mask. Do I have my backup mask? Anyone gotten that way? I couldn't come to church this morning. I was later than I have been. I've been coming early to make sure all the signs get out and everything. I'm like trying to find my mask. It was crammed in some workout shorts in the laundry. I finally found it. So, that is Amy. But I'm just doing what I can to keep you 6 feet from me. Can we start showering now, or is it still just washing our hands? No. Anyway, we can joke around. I like to laugh. But here's the thing: at the party, aka wedding yesterday, I had a better time because I'm serious and living life purposely. Because I know what's important. And so for me, the party is this celebration of this covenant between, a man and a woman. It was a beautiful thing. The dude is awesome. It's the kind of guy you're like, man, I was happy for them. And then I'm also happy because, they're going in the right direction in life. And so, a birth announcement, it really doesn't say much, but at a funeral will ultimately reveal, a life's true value. Did we live in such a way that it matters? What you do and how you live is very important. Now, and this is like a tough thing within Christianity, because we have a concept of grace, right? And so we're not saved. We're not made right with God by what we do. It's not that, I did certain things. It's not like, Jeff went into ministry. That's 10 points for the eternal scale, so maybe he'll get into heaven or not. It's not, okay, I did this, I helped an old lady across the street, that's a point. We're not like, God's not keeping tally and score, but it's purely by grace and trust in Him that I'm made right with Him, but we then have to live differently because of that. And we live seriously because of that. And so in life, it's what you do and also the things you set in motion, the momentum you give to the things that God wants. And so part of my living my life is that I'm doing the God stuff. We're out there, we're talking to people, we're in the community, we're doing things. And a couple of years ago, the popular phrase, I'm so glad it died, but apparently I'm keeping it alive. YOLO. Remember that? YOLO. Some of you are like, I don't know. It's okay. It was stupid. And YOLO sounds like bolo. Anyway, most of you don't even know what a bolo is. But it was sort of this idea of YOLO. You only live once. And so people would kind of live crazy lives and do all kinds of stuff because, you only live once. But truth is, you do. But there's this better understanding of how to live is fear of the Lord. Because ultimately, God created the world. God has given you life, and God has given you one life to live. And again, you got one shot. It doesn't mean we don't mess up. It doesn't mean we don't mess things up sometimes. But how we live matters. And ultimately, I think one of the, it was funny because I had all these subtitles in my head when I was. I know this is going to sound unusual for some of you. I actually have a journal, and a lot of times when I'm working on a message series, it's like I have all these titles in my head for what it's going to come out as. And we're calling Ecclesiastes life under the sun because it talks about life under the sun. But really, one of them was one of my subtitles is like living with the end in mind, because we live our life ultimately knowing. Or we're trying to go to a certain place. We have this idea of where life goes. Now, anyone ever use a GPS? Probably everyone. Doesn't matter how old you are now. In my day, we had these things called maps. Anyone remember maps? And you had to open them up, and there was stuff on them, and you had to point to things. And some of you remember these things. Great. Love maps. I remember when I was 16, I got a job. It was funny because I would not probably let my 16-year-old do this. It was like I had my job. I was 16. My boss is like, okay, drive to Philadelphia. Here's a map. Try to get to this location. Oh, you've never driven a stick? You'll figure it out on the way. And I remember trying to, and now we have GPS. Now the cool thing about GPS is, it can recalculate, but you have to program in a destination, right? And ultimately, if you understand where you're going in life, when you understand you're trying to do God's will and you're trying to get to a certain place, you'll calculate your route based on that. Now, you do mess up sometimes. I totally misunderstood. Some of us were on a Saturday ride, and I totally misunderstood. They said the second right, and I thought they meant the second right, meaning the third right, because we never take the first right. And anyway, so I went on the wrong thing, and they're like, you blew by the turn. I'm like, okay, next one, we're heading to Maryland. Hammer down. But, the GPS can recalculate. I actually had to turn on Google Maps while I was driving or riding and go, how do I get back to where I am now? Because I have no idea where I am. I'm lost. Which, getting lost when you're biking is good because you bike longer. I got lost the other day. I was like, I do not know where this road comes out. Got any extra miles. It was great. But, in life, GPS, you can recalculate when you make mistakes, but it's best to kind of constantly be looking at where am I trying to go? Where am I trying to go in life? And ultimately, that's, what God wants for us. What's important? This big question that I ask every year about this time of year. This is sort of although it was a weird year because we kind of didn't really finish off some things, I've been thinking about what does it mean to make disciples? I know the theological answers. I teach classes on this stuff, don't get me wrong. But I kind of go, what are we doing as a church? What are we doing as individuals? Where are people? And kind of ask that question every year. I go, what is it important? What are we doing that's important? Now, Matthew 28, starting verse 18, this is going to be a scripture you've probably heard Jeff, preach lots of times if you've been here. Jesus came and told his disciples, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So, your job as a believer is to be a disciple, but your job is also to make disciples. Sometimes people stress on the go and all this stuff, and I've worked through the Greek of this in the past with you a little bit, but really the only command in here, if you look at the Greek, it's a little less clear in the English, is to make disciples. So our job is to make disciples. And I was thinking about that this week, and so do you have that wheel thing I asked you for? Thanks. I never tell them when I'm going to need it. I just say, hey, I've got this slide. I want you to put it up sometime. The sound guys, it's always their fault, but sometimes they do it right, so good job. And while we have to have related sound people because our sound booth is not wide enough, it's a crazy, crazy time. But the discipleship wheel, I did not make this up. If I made this up, you'd be like, oh, Jeff's so smart. Jeff's not that smart. But the discipleship wheel, and I posted this in the group this week. If you're in the Facebook group, if you're not, you should join the Facebook group. But, there's this obedient Christian in action, this obedient life, if you will. And obviously Christ is at the center, or it should be obvious. Sometimes it's not really, but we keep Christ at the center. There's the word and prayer, very important. We talk about the fact that being a disciple for me means I'm reading, I'm studying the Bible, because often my behavior and thoughts are not like the Bible is, and so that's something God uses correctly. And prayer, those are kind of essential habits that we talk about. And then really fellowship, which I think sometimes we do a good job with. Like, y'all like each other, which is hard because some of y'all aren't that likable. Now everyone's like, was he looking at me when he said that? Or was he not looking at me on purpose? No. But, but it's also witnessing, if you will. We use the word engage with that. Maybe I'll redo the wheel and put the words we use it. And the fact that we have to engage the world outside of here. Now, it doesn't, like today, it doesn't look like anybody's engaging because, we're only I think 30% capacity right now because, social distancing in the world. But, this is important. If we're believers and followers of Jesus, we have to become disciples. If we're not, we need to become disciples. And I got a whole survey talking about that. You should take that one too. I'm actually doing something with that. You may not see it for a while. It may not make sense to the fall, but we're working on things this summer. It's important to be a disciple. Jesus wants us to be disciples, and then God will give you your GPS directions along the way as you go there. You may not know the final one. My final one is that I'm serving Christ in all I do. I don't know when this journey is going to end. I've had some close calls. Sometimes they were on bikes. I had this car cut between two of us the other day. Oh, it was scary. Almost met Jesus. And some of you are like, you need to stop doing healthy things like biking. Yeah, probably. There's a lot of things I need to stop doing, and some of them involve cheeseburgers. But Philippians 1 says this. This is the Apostle Paul writing. He says, starting in verse 20, for I fully expect and hope that I will never be ashamed, but will continue to be bold for Christ as I have been in the past. If you know Paul's life, he was bold. He was out there, right? He was doing the stuff, man. He was testifying in front of kings, Most of us would be scared of the kind of stuff he did. He was getting pelted with rocks, kind of tough stuff. He shipwrecked a ton. It would be tempting to not be bold, but Paul was bold. It says, and I trust that my life will bring honor to Christ, whether I live or die. For to me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. Now that sounds like pessimistic. We're going to get to that. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ, so I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which is far better for me, but for your sakes it is better that I continue to live. Paraphrase. It's better for you that I live, better for me that I die. And so, but we should live in a way that dying really is gain. If we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, if we want God to be pleased with the way we live, we don't want to just kind of skid into heaven barely, but if we want to hear well done, not, yeah, you got here, we live our lives differently. All that matters to Paul ultimately is that he's fulfilling God's plan, right? He's fulfilling God's purposes. And understanding life and death, is important. And there's this faith perspective. Ephesians 2:10, again, I say it so much, you should be able to quote that one. For we are all workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God has prepared in advance. You guys sound so sad when you say that. Are you Sadducees? No, it's a joyous verse. I know we kind of drone when we say it. But if God has given us plans and a purpose for our lives, part of being a disciple is following that out, understanding what we're called to do, and then living out this Jesus stuff, because ultimately that's our number one reward. Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light, but it's still a yoke. It's a way of living. It's this way to commit our lives to living to God. And, whatever good or bad comes our way, we live with purpose if we're following Christ. Romans 12:1 says this, the message. I don't know that I put it in the notes today, sorry. It says, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. And what God wants from us is to live our life different. And it's a good way. Now, most of us anyone have a bucket list? Like, are you officially that? Okay, kind of, my son has a bucket list. He's got a metal bucket. He's got a wooden bucket. No. Anyway. But anyone have a bucket list? You have cool things on there? I was going to ask you what you have on your bucket list, but I can't hear anything because we're all wearing masks. So, a lot of times I'll just throw out, a lot of people want to write a book. I mean, some of you are like, no, I want to read a book. But, I hang out with people who are like, I want to write a book. I want to write a book that no one reads. That's called a PhD thesis. Or I want to spend all my time writing a dissertation that is on a shelf somewhere. That's been read by 5 people who are required and paid to. Or maybe you want to travel the world, right? Like that's it. You're like, oh, that'd be great. Own a tiger. That Tiger King thing, man. Or swim with dolphins or sharks. That could be your last thing on your bucket list. I've always wanted to write East Coast, West Coast, while filled with the Holy Ghost. Come on. I've always wanted to go zorbing. It's like you get in those giant balls, like hamster wheels, and like roll down hills and stuff. Hot air balloons. Those kind of sound cool. But I'm a little bit afraid of heights. I don't know if you do that. I was up here painting one time. I was standing on the scaffolding. I'm like shaking like a leaf. So maybe heights are not good for me. I've always wanted to do, and I will never do it. Those wingsuits they have, like you skydive, and you're like a flying squirrel. Would love to do that. It would also be the last thing I do, because I know I would just go smack into a mountain or something. But Paul's been concerned. For the Philippians, not his bucket list, but his bucket list that what God wants him to do. Like, it's not bad to have fun. It's not bad to have experiences. It's not even bad to go to the party, depending on the kind of party it is. But the funeral, the thing that sets your minds on what's important, I've had the privilege and awkwardness of often, talking to people in their final days. Suddenly, things that meant a lot don't mean much. You kind of focus in because it's over. And you're not worried about, what TV show you're going to watch. You're not worried about, petty little things you had between people generally. You're focused on what was important. And so we should live life soberly. I know this message is kind of not as cheery and happy as some, but it's true. We should live life about what's important, not just the stuff that catches our attention. Now, it was funny. I met a guy at the wedding yesterday he was in the family, and I always like to find out what people do, for a living. And he had a really interesting, kind of unique job, and I'm like, how did you get into that? And so we had this good conversation about how he does this thing with like airplane crashes. Like, he goes on site and does all this stuff after an airplane crashes. And, it's kind of a very unique job. That was one my guidance counselor didn't mention to me. Probably would not have jumped on it anyway. I have a list of jobs my guidance counselor never told me were jobs that sounded cool. It was kind of interesting, but it made me think about, crashing on an airplane. Now, some of you, anyone never flown? I didn't mean you were flying, but I mean, some of us have never, probably most of it now have flown on an airplane. Have you ever had a close call? Like, I had some turbulence one time. I'm like, this is it. I don't think the plane can take this anymore. I put my hands above my head and went, woo, the whole time because I thought it was like a roller coaster. Now, That was a long story. But one time I remember flying, and there's one time I thought the plane was going to go down, which, I remember that. But I remember flying not too long ago, and the plane I was supposed to be on the next day went down. It makes you think, right? Like, I was telling my kids, I'm like, you're going to hear the plane went down. That wasn't mine. And I was actually booked on that same type of aircraft, and possibly that same aircraft. And, I had to get rebooked, got stranded in an airport for a little while because of it. But, you kind of start thinking about life or death. Again, the funeral's better than the party because it makes you think what's important. And so, I start thinking about what's important. My wife, my kids, you guys, people in this town. You start thinking about, these things are important. Not, do I have a nice shirt? Not did I eat the big shrimp at the party. Man, the salmon they had yesterday, bomb diggity. It was like the best salmon I've ever had. I'm just saying. So if some of you cook salmon, this is your challenge. Try to beat the jerk salmon I had yesterday. Oh, I know. It was good. And it was healthy even. But what's important is the things that God's entrusted me. To live as Christ, to die as gain. Jesus said, I tell you, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after can do no more. But I tell you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body's been killed, has authority to throw it into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. And so are our thoughts about, our sports and stuff? Or is it about Jesus doing his will? Or are our thoughts all this week about Netflix? Or is it about him? Is it about video games? Or is it about Jesus and doing his will? And this isn't me like killjoy, Jeff has no fun. But when you understand, keep the end in mind, ultimately you stand before God, you'll live your life differently when you know the end of things. To live as Jesus, to die is even more Jesus. To live for Christ means we live our life differently. Now, I did all that to get to verse 5, and I know I got to keep moving because, man, we are not going to get through the whole chapter for sure, which I thought, but I thought I'd get further than this. Anyway, better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. A fool's laughter is quickly gone like thorns crackling in a fire. This also is meaningless. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Tell that to my garage project. Patience is better than pride. Now, here's the thing. When you correct someone, what's usually the response? Especially if it's a teenager. Whatever. When you get a ticket driving, what's your general response? You are correct, officer. I deserved that. I apologize for speeding. I should have seen that sign. No, I did not use my signal. You are, thank you. No. We're making all kinds of excuses. And generally, if someone corrects us, we're not happy. I've sat in my office, corrected somebody in a very gentle, kind way. They generally do not take well of it, and they leave the church. So, if I want you to leave the church, I'm going to correct you. No, if I want you to be a disciple of Jesus, sometimes there's a correction, and it's hard, but we have to take it. Most of us love praise, and we struggle with criticism. But if we take honest criticism to heart, it shapes our character. There's been times that I wanted to throat punch someone for something they said to me, but it was true. And often we have to reevaluate the way we're living because of that. We rarely want to be, you're right. It's just like thorns crackling the fire. Now, I remember in Maine, we were all like sitting around this bonfire. It was like for middle school kids. I did middle school ministry a lot. And, we're just sitting there, and my friend Charlie, who was his house, he was keeping the fire going, and was, we're sitting there, and all of a sudden he comes over and throws a Christmas tree that's been sitting out for 6 months or so on the fire. I have never in my life experienced such heat. It was one of those things that made you jump back 10 feet. Literally, it was like, it burns so hot. I'm like understanding why houses burn down because it's this big flash of heat. But then it was gone. And thorns are kind of the same way. You can throw a big pile of old thorns on it. It's dry, it's crackled, the heat. It seems like it's a lot, but then it's gone. There's not a lot of heat content to it. As most of you know, I spent a lot of time, cutting trees and things, and I can tell you, different woods have different heat contents, and you're not going to heat your house for the winter with old Christmas trees and in thorns. And so it's people often. What he's saying is people often talk a big game, but don't come through. Like some of you played sports. I remember like football. Anyone play football? Okay. It's like you're in the locker room and people are like, yeah. And they're like slapping pads and everything. They're acting like, they're going to be so good. And then they're terrible. And you go out, maybe play, you're going to play basketball. People are like, I'm going to break your ankles. And then they're like the worst ever. And you're like, you talk the game, but you ain't got the game. And I remember wrestling. Oh my gosh. I remember this guy. I don't know what. I was wrestling and he just kept talking smack. Like trying to yeah, you can't throw me all this. I'm like, I don't have to throw you. I'm beating you by 9 points already. Why am I going to fall into your trap? But he talked a big game about wrestling. He just couldn't wrestle. And there's a lot, you talk a big game about, I'm a squat a lot, or I'm going to ride the bike a lot, if you're the cardio weirdo or the friend. We got a lot of inside jokes here. Anna's a cardio weirdo. I enjoy riding with her, though. My legs were so sore after I rode with her, though. I'm just saying. It was, but I'm also more likely to pick things up and put things down. I like to do both, mostly because I'm trying to be healthy as long as I live. It says this verse 9. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool. I know nobody has a problem with that, right? James 1:19, understand this, my dearest brothers and sisters, you must be all quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Now, nobody here struggles with anger, right? Some of you are mad I brought it up. But the truth is, we could struggle with anger. I've got lots of lessons I've learned with that. But really, it's this, a wise person doesn't react immediately to circumstances. You learn to be metered. You learn to calm down. As sports, I always learned to calm down and relax and then take it out when it was time. And I think in our time, social media, do we value the thoughtful answer or the quick comeback? And often we speak in ways that are really kind of ignorant. And I think some of us are going to go back and read our tweets from 10 years ago and go, what was I thinking? Some of y'all need to get off of Twitter. Some of you need to get off Facebook too. But, okay, verse 10. Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. Anyone, great memories, the good old days, high school, college, we moved to California, a lot of fun stuff. We forget the awkwardness and the problems. We in my day, that's like old guys like me say that, you're younger, so you wouldn't. But in my day, we had jarts. We just played with dangerous lawn darts. Jarts were these long darts with points on them, and we threw them at each other. I mean, threw them at the circle that was there. Some of you know what I mean. It was like you'd stand in the circle while the person throws it and see if you could move out in time. Sometimes you could, sometimes you couldn't. We lost some kids that way. It was dangerous. We lost a few kids, lost a few eyes, lost a few hands. But we were like, oh, that was the great thing. But we biked without helmets and we got head injuries. We walked uphill to school in the snow and got frostbite. But we tend to kind of make everything sound awesome when we were kids. We didn't have air conditioning as a kid. That's how awesome it was. I live in Delaware without air conditioning now. We can appreciate the past, but we can't live in it. And it's funny because every generation laments the problems with the next one. I found some quotes. This is talking about millennials. So throw out your okay boomer when I say this, but they're out of touch hipsters who spend too much on coffee and too little on facial hair care. Many are spoiled, entitled, or both. That was from a boss's guide to managing bratty millennials. Don't worry, I'm not staying there. I know I can't tell, but under that mask. but here's something. Whither are the manly vigor and athletic appearance of our forefathers flown? Can these be their legitimate heirs? Surely. No, a race of effeminate, self-admiring, emaciated fribbles can never have descended from such a direct line from the heroes. That was in 1771. I'm not sure what a fribble is. It sounds like something from Star Trek. There was tribbles, trouble with tribbles, and the little things came out. But point being, there were all kinds of generations. My favorite was, Aristotle said they think they know everything and they're always quite sure about it. Talking about the youth. So, every generation kind of picks on it. It's just not wise. Move on. Stop posting about millennials. Stop saying, okay, boomer. Okay, boomer. I'm an Xer. Just remember, if you boomers and millennials, you're fighting. There's a generation between you that doesn't like either of you. But I love you. No, X generation, man, that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, verse 11. So we've got to keep moving. Wisdom is even better when you have money. Both are a benefit as you go through life. Wisdom and money can get you almost anything, but only wisdom can save your life. Accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life. We talked about money last week. And I know it's like we've been dropping some heavy topics, but Ecclesiastes, he's dropped some heavy topics because the word drops some heavy topics because it's better to be at a funeral than at a party. Come on. It's not that money is evil. It's necessary. But when we put our whole pursuit in that, it's not a good thing. But wisdom is about how you lead your life. And so we need money, but pursuing wisdom about how to live our life is most important. And it says, accept the way God does things. Okay, in the end, I've had friends who are like, I can't serve a God who says this. I can't serve God. I'm like, it don't matter what you can do or what you can't do. You ain't got a world. God created this. And so we're kind of subject to the way he's made things. It's best to kind of go to pray for wisdom and understanding and go along with God's plan. And we trust that, Romans 8:28, and we know that God causes everything to work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose for him. And so I trust that when I serve God, when I love him, that ultimately he's going to direct things in a way that are for my benefit, or they're a benefit for his eternal plan. Job's wife, it's interesting because Job's wife at some point, she's like, Job, everything's, his kids are dying, houses are collapsing, he's losing all his money, and then he gets boils all over his body and he's sitting there, he's scraping his skin with a piece of broken pottery. I've had medical issues, but I've never been sitting there scraping my body with, boils all over, and I'm just picturing, I don't know, they blow up like those Dr. Pimple Popper things. I don't know. That's what I'm picturing. He's Dr. Pimple Poppering. Is that poppering? That's a new word. I'm going to drop that one. Poppering, and big giant boils. Okay, picture that for a minute. That's Job. In the middle of this, I know it's gross and disgusting, but it's in the Bible. What's in the Bible? That's in the Bible. And so in the middle of it, Job's wife's like, hey, dude, curse God and die. I don't know if she wanted to reset, new life, I don't know. But Job replied, should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? And so this, Job did nothing wrong. Sometimes bad stuff happens. But sometimes it's for good. God will still work good out of it. We don't always understand it as it's going on. Now, this Greek man he was talking about missing his airline. He goes, I was mad because nobody helped me reach the gate on time. And he got there just after. He had someone who was supposed to escort him to the gate. They didn't get there quickly enough. He missed his flight. He's like, nobody cared. He was upset. Till that plane was the Ethiopian airline that went down. Changes your perspective. Not saying God's going to protect you from a plane crash. But, sometimes we take the bad things in life, we think they're bad, but maybe God will work out good in it. It's good not to die in a plane crash. I often think what I'm going to do in a plane crash, but that's a whole other story, and we don't have time. Here we go. Point being of all this is we should live, we should face life wisely by understanding our final end. You live differently when you keep the end in mind. It's funny because a lot of people at good wedding yesterday was fun. It was kind of smaller because plans had to change because we're in the middle of a pandemic, or maybe we're not. I don't know. You can argue about that later with your masks on outside. I ain't even getting in that. But it's like we spend so much time sometimes focusing on planning this party that is the wedding. People would probably be better served, some of them, putting that much time and effort into their marriages. Because, we do the party, but we don't think about the marriage. And life's that. We need to not just, plan for the party of life. We plan for the end. Are we living our lives in a way that pleases God or pleases ourselves? Dying is ultimately the first day of eternity. I want to hear, well done. It doesn't matter if God gives you 5 talents or 3 talents or 2 talents or 1 talent, half a talent. Sometimes some of us feel like we got no talent. But it's, how are you using the things that God's given you to live in a way that ultimately brings him honor? And ultimately, here's the thing. Heaven's not a consolation prize. I've said this before. We pray for people and we're like, oh, they died. Well, we want people to stay with us, don't get me wrong. But if you're a believer and follower of Jesus, there's an eternal reward. That's the beginning of everything. And if you've lived your life well, you're going to approach that day a lot easier with a lot more confidence than if you didn't throughout life. And so, advice from the old dude to some of you younger folks, or to the younger folks, some of you older folks, I don't know where we fall on the age thing. I kind of picture Shlomo here as sort of this grandfatherly advice. It's like, and I'm not all there yet to the grandfather state, but live your life in a way that I don't have to lie at your funeral. Live a life in such a way that you have confidence in where you're going, and your confidence that you're going to hear, well done. And so I want you to think this week. Here's final thought as the band comes kind of back to play. Is where do you struggle to trust God's plans instead of your own? And how would this week look different if you trusted Him, His plans, His calling for the way you to live?